YouTube boxing has been around for over 6 years at this point, which is crazy to think about. Starting off with Joe Weller versus Theo Baker, influencers and social media personalities fighting each other has soared into the mainstream. The likes of KSI and Jake Paul have reached a new level of stardom due to being pioneers of the YouTube boxing space, and that can all be traced back to this initial Joe Weller video. Mike Tyson returning to the ring in a professional boxing bout is a direct result of Joe Weller punching up Malfoy in a 5-minute video. If you think about it, Joe Weller vs Theo Baker is one of the best examples of the butterfly effect. Anyway, we've had some huge moments in YouTube boxing. Major players in the traditional boxing landscape have gotten involved, hundreds of millions of views and dollars have been generated, but is the bubble starting to burst? Like I said before, there have been mega events put on by some of the biggest influencers on the planet. KSI, Logan Paul, Jake Paul have carried the YouTube boxing scene on their back, but with them out of the picture, what happens? After the Prime card last October with KSI vs Tommy Fury and Logan Paul vs Dylan Dennis as the double main event, the interest for YouTube boxing has dwindled. Jake Paul is fighting Mike Tyson and that's going to be a huge event, but even that is still facing scrutiny. Misfits have not put on a pay-per-view card since October, and the fighters they do have in their current stable cannot sell the same amount of tickets like a KSI or Jake Paul. The non-pay-per-view Misfits cards are getting a lot of views, they are, and DAZN seems happy with the numbers, that's why they're putting more on, but I'm talking more so about longevity here. There are rising stars like Salt Papi and Anisong Gibb in which people do want to see them fight, but they cannot sell out a massive stadium off their own back, and the pay-per-view numbers wouldn't be big either. I mean, Slim vs Gibb is one of the biggest fights within the YouTube boxing community, but as a main event, if they put it on, it just won't reach the same numbers as KSI or Jake Paul. Even if KSI fought a random nobody off the street, that will sell more pay-per-views than Gibb vs Slim. Without the big players, YouTube boxing doesn't reach the same global impact or mainstream attention. However, I don't think that necessarily means that crossover boxing is dead in the water. YouTube boxing has grown into its own niche alongside traditional boxing, and with any sport, you'll have smaller events that only the dedicated audience will tune into, and then they will put on occasional major pay-per-view level cards that will attract the masses. Matchroom, Golden Boy, and other boxing promotions make shows every week on DAZN that only a fraction of subscribers will actually tune into. Let's use Jermaine Franklin vs Devin Vargas for example, as it's coming up in a few days. The attention surrounding that event doesn't even compare to Devin Haney vs Ryan Garcia, and even more recently, Fury vs Usyk. Now, people aren't saying that traditional boxing is dead or that the bubble is going to burst there. Franklin vs Vargas is just another, smaller event that won't capture mainstream eyes. The same goes for the UFC with the finite cards at the Apex. And guess what? The same goes for YouTube boxing, and more specifically, Misfits and their cards. Elle Brooke vs Paige Van Zandt will be a relatively small card that won't move the needle at all, but that also isn't an indication that YouTube boxing is some sort of dead space now. That all being said, the difference between influencer boxing and traditional boxing is substantial, as Misfits and MVP do need to find more pay-per-view level stars and put on events that will capture new markets because crossover boxing is an emerging space. It's not like traditional boxing. To compare, traditional boxing has been around for over 100 years and they have room to come out with bad cards. Also, there are way more superstars to build pay-per-views off of in the traditional side of the sport, both current and former, that sell tickets, make headlines, etc. Traditional boxing has a lot of infrastructure, backing, and essentially has been around for so long that it's impossible for it to go bust. There's a lot of old money in boxing, and because of the Saudis, boxing is flourishing. YouTube boxing has been around for 6 years, and the 3 biggest names in the space from 2018, KSI, Jake Paul, and Logan Paul, are still the 3 biggest names in 2024. Since 2018, nobody has come along and really emerged as a massive superstar like them, and that's concerning because this is the influencer influencer boxing space. The job of social media personalities is to get attention, but due to multiple factors, nobody has been able to translate their social media audience to pay-per-view and ticket sales quite like a KSI or the Paul brothers. The global/mainstream appeal, whatever you want to call it, of influencer boxing lives and dies on these three guys fighting. If Jake, KSI, and Logan stop boxing, then MVP and Misfits are without the real money makers and will just appeal to their dedicated fan bases. There is a market for influencer boxing without the KSIs or the Paul brothers of the world, but it just becomes another niche offering on DAZN, just like the smaller boxing shows. I think one of the major reasons why no other influencer has managed to cross over into superstardom like KSI or Jake Paul is because most of them speak like Anthony fucking Joshua now. I've seen YouTubers like King Kenny and Fox the G dedicate themselves to the sport of boxing, which is fantastic, don't get me wrong, but they've kinda lost part of their humor and personality in press conferences as a result. It's too serious, and I get that they're trying to emulate traditional boxers with how they conduct themselves because they are in the gym improving their craft, and again, that's awesome, but it does kind of spoil the YouTube boxing product. I'm not saying they need to start unnecessary drama with their opponents, because there's nothing more fucking cringe than forced beef, but having a bit more fun during the pre-fight build-up would be nice. Recently, pro boxers have taken a page out of the influencers playbook by being a bit more interesting and showing off their personality more. Brandon Scott dresses up in a Spider-Man costume during press conferences, for example, and Ryan Garcia, what can I say, is a full-blown character at this point as well. Pro boxers have been trying to engage their fans outside the ring, and I think that YouTubers are dedicating themselves to the sport to the point where it's becoming a bit detrimental to their brand. We're hearing the same usual boxing phrases to questions at Misfits press conferences, and I swear, if I ever hear I can beat him every day and twice on Sunday in a Misfits pre-fight interview, I'm gonna fucking blow my brains out. That's just one little nitpick I've noticed in YouTube boxing, and of course I'm not the first guy to point this out, but I do find it good to bring to the fore once again. That's not to say that crossover boxing doesn't do anything better than traditional boxing, however. The pacing of each Misfits event, for example, is near perfect, and they move from fight to fight much quicker than pro boxing. During the Fury vs Usyk broadcast, the time it took to get to each fight felt glacial, and it shouldn't take DAZN forever and a fucking day to move through the card. Misfits Boxing has the pacing all figured out, and it's very welcomed by me. Regardless, Misfits and MVP have got to start looking for fighters that are going to break out a bit, like KSI and Logan Paul, even though I don't really think it's possible to generate that sort of buzz with anyone else. They are a special breed after all. Salt Papi has been the closest to getting traditional boxing eyeballs on him, but that's really it. I'd love to see more influencers from other areas of the world compete. Let's see YouTubers from Japan, more Brazilian content creators, etc. Tap into more and more markets to stave off stagnation. So is YouTube boxing dying? No. Over the past 6 years, thanks to Misfits and MVP, YouTube boxing has become its own niche, with a smaller dedicated fan base watching each and every card. Then, every once in a while, we have a gigantic pay-per-view card that captures the eyes of the world. Exactly the same as traditional boxing and how that system works. YouTube boxing is here to stay. It will ebb and flow, some cards will be dog shit, and some will light the world on fire. That's normal, but since crossover boxing is in its infancy, Misfits and MVP do need to be a bit more careful compared to traditional boxing promoters about what cards they put out and who they spotlight.